In 2011 and 2012, Troy McLachlan and Ted Holden were discussing the possibility of writing a book on human origins, taking into account the Mars images and what is known as the Purple Dawn of Creation from Troy's Saturn Death Cult and from the works of Eduardo Cardona. Because of the evidence of previous and possibly continuing habitation that have been seen on Mars over the past couple of decades, they were assuming at first that human origins must have come from Mars. Nonetheless, it gradually became clear that there were problems with that idea. Mars, it turns out, would have shared the same general history with Earth, and therefore would experience the same Purple Dawn age. Skulls of early hominids and dinosaurs all show the same kinds of huge eye sockets we observe in lemurs, owls, bush babies, etc., that are leftover creatures from that age. Humans and dolphins, by way of contrast, have the smallest relative eye sizes of all the advanced creatures. It's simply very hard to believe that humans could arise in such darkish conditions. In particular, that same consideration, which would eliminate Earth as a plausible original home world of humans within our system, but also eliminate Mars. Our system had in fact been a double system some tens of thousands of years ago, with a bright northern part consisting of the Sun, Jupiter in a much closer orbit than it is now, and Mercury in a darkish southern part, within the purplish plasma heliosphere of the dwarf star Saturn, which now survive as the gas giant planet. Humans, with their relatively tiny eyes, had to have risen within the bright part of that antique system, and it turns out that one of the rocky bodies within that bright northern system would be Jupiter's largest moon, Ganymede, could have amounted to an ideal human world at that time. This video describes that story. As we take a look at Ted Holden and Troy McLachlan's Ganymede hypothesis. How did you get into this? When did you learn about the electric universe and all this?
Oh man, it's like there are multiple pieces to this picture. We went over one piece of the picture.
Well, I was wondering what inspired you. What got you onto the whole thing?
About Ganymede. It's a long story.
Yeah.
Going 1971, 72.
Yeah.
Me getting out of college and learning about Immanuel Velikovsky. I had a roommate that was into, it had a number of Immanuel Velikovsky's books lying around, right? And,
yeah,
I sort of got hooked into Worlds in Collision, right? And I mean, I'd gone and checked out a number of the sources for Worlds in Collision, and they all checked, right? I mean, the guy was not making any of this stuff up. I mean, Immanuel Velikovsky is just the author of one of the two books which I regard as foundational to understanding ancient history, right? To trying to make sense out of Bible stories, things like that, right? Trying to make sense out of, what we actually know about human origins. And, the picture which you would get from college courses is not really very reasonable. I mean, they'll tell you that humans came down from trees, and started running around on the ground in Africa like somewhere 3, 4, 5, 6 million years ago. Before that, they're just sitting around in tree limbs, scratching themselves and, whatever, right? But for a human to come down and start trying to live on the African savannah with women and children, that's just impossible. You understand what I'm saying? It's like, I mean, there's no way to believe that.
right.
What's the most major difference between human infants and baby deer? If somebody asks you that question.
Well, human infants are completely helpless.
No. It's like the baby deer know enough to keep quiet.
Yeah.
But when you've got like predators walking around, about humans coming down onto the savannah, maybe a male hunter group, with armed, they're just like 4 or 5 guys by themselves. They've got spears, they've got, whatever, right? It's like they might survive, right, for a while at least. But like with women and kids, that's not going to work.
I always had a hard time picturing the first human because he would have had to be a baby. How could he have survived?
Yeah, I mean, what's going to happen the first time some infant starts screaming his head off because something displeased him or something wasn't right, or
It's going to get eaten.
Yeah. I mean, that's just ringing the dinner bell out there on the African savannah. That's ridiculous. Which is ridiculous, but it's supposed that's the way humans are supposed to have lived. And then you get this out of Africa theory, right? And it's supposed to have moved on into Europe and other places, right? And but what they tell us is that we don't really know much of any. This has been going on for like 5 or 6 million years, but we don't really know anything about human existence other than like within the last 3, 4, 5, 6,000 years. Before that, we assume they were probably just walking around beating on trees with sticks.
Yeah.
That's the whole picture of human origins. What I tell people is we can't go out into the cosmos like that. We cannot go out into galactic space, not knowing anything about our own origins, not knowing who we are, basically in the state of amnesia victims.
Mm-hmm.
That's a problem, right?
Right.
So, I mean, that's some of the motivation for this stuff. I mean, you've got the question of a Saturn theory,
Mm-hmm.
and the question of the Earth having once been a satellite of Saturn's, which I
Mm-hmm.
learned about at that, the first I heard of that ever really was at that McMaster conference before,
Yeah.
which was sort of like where some of Thunderbolts got started. That's probably the begin point for the Thunderbolts group.
Are the way the planets are displaced in space, is that what gave them the idea for the Saturn theory and the actual tilt?
No, it's basically iconography and ancient history and writings.
Okay.
Yeah, look, I mean, the vestiges of this ancient system are all around us, okay? It's like if you were to go to some place where primitive people congregate today, like DNC headquarters in Chicago or something like that, or Baltimore, Ravens game, and just say, guys, I need an astral religion, right? It's like, we're putting on some sort of a TV show or something. I need some sort of a new religion, which involves worshiping things that you see in the sky, right?
Mm-hmm.
$100 a piece. It's like, I'll be back in a couple hours, as soon as you
Yeah,
come up, right? It's like, they would end up worshiping the sun and the moon, wouldn't they?
I would think so.
Maybe Venus, right? I mean, the average person can find Venus once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
The average person cannot find Jupiter or Saturn. It's like Jupiter maybe once in a while, right? But Saturn, I mean, not likely. And they're not going to worship something which is that microscopic a thing in the sky, right? But the two chieftain gods of every one of those ancient religions, the pantheon religions, were Jupiter and Saturn. They were not the sun and the moon.
Right.
Okay. I mean, Yahweh is like basically the same word as Jove, right? Even Israelite religion, if you go back far enough, involves worship of Jupiter and Saturn.
Mm-hmm.
Worst cases, I mean, you've got this question of the ancient pantheon religions. You can read through Plato's writings and understand that Plato understood well enough the difference between God with a capital G and these pantheon gods and goddesses, right? And the pantheon gods and goddesses were all connected to cosmic objects, right? I mean, the name connections between the Greek and Roman gods and the bodies within our solar system are primordial. They're older than we can trace.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense.
Okay, the Greeks used the word Kronos for Saturn, right? Elohim, right? They claim that there's a dual, two traditions that you can discern in the Old Testament, the Torah, the Bible, right? Which
Yeah.
would be like a Yahwist and an Elohist tradition, right? Yahweh, like I say, is the same word as Jove, which is, with Jupiter. El was universally a word for Saturn in the ancient Near East, and you can convince yourself of that by doing Google searches on El, Saturn, and Babylon, and you have to include the term Babylon to weed out the hits for the old GM Saturn dealerships, or, the car that they were making.
Yeah.
10 years ago or so, at any rate.
So that's how they came about.
Yeah.
It took all the way to Velikovsky to figure that out, or did someone have the theory before?
Velikovsky had partially figured it out. Okay, it really took David Talbot is really the guy that completely figured all of that out. And
Yes. In 1980.
it begins around 75, 76, somewhere around there. You started reading about Saturn. They constructed the Ponce journal back along about 72, 73.
Right.
And started reading those stories. Plato referred to antediluvians as children of Kronos. right?
Mm-hmm.
And both Hesiod and Ovid and a number of other, Greek and Roman writers just claimed that you had a golden age when supposedly Kronos or Saturn was the king of heaven, followed by a silver age. And Troy has sort of upset my thinking on this a little bit, right? Troy puts the flood after the silver age, I think. I would have to get back to you on that, but somewhere in the same area you've got the flood. But you've got a golden age when Saturn or Kronos was the king of heaven, followed by a silver age when Jupiter or Zeus was the king of heaven, right? Now the word Jupiter comes from Sanskrit, right? Dios Pitar, sky father. And
Oh, okay.
Mircea Eliade and other supposed experts on mythology, will claim that, what that means is, that the ancients were worshiping the sky father and earth mother, right? Gaia and Dios Pitar, Jupiter. But it does, nobody's going to worship the sky, right? The sky we see every day. People don't worship things which are common, right? It doesn't mean our father the sky. It means our father in the sky. You understand what I mean? Which is going to be Jupiter. It's going to be the dwarf star.
Yes.
Okay. Now, Jupiter and Saturn are both at one time had been dwarf stars.
Yes.
Why are they no longer dwarf stars? When a dwarf star is captured by a main sequence star like our sun, the dwarf star dies out, right, and becomes a gas giant. These stars, both main sequence and dwarf stars, are powered by Birkeland currents. Stars are not thermonuclear engines. That's another thing they teach in school, which is wrong. Okay. Stars are powered by cosmic Birkeland currents. A dwarf star sitting there by itself is going to be like a lightning rod. I mean, it'll glow. Certainly the radiation that you get from a dwarf star, like anything else, I mean, it's going to be powered by one of these cosmic Birkeland currents. When a dwarf star is captured by a main sequence star, then it's as if you had a 100 or 200 foot lightning rod sitting there glowing in a storm. And while that's happening, the Acme lightning rod company's truck drives up, and the guys get out and they construct a 1,000-foot lightning rod 150 feet away from the smaller lightning.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to happen? Well, the small light, the 100-foot lightning rod is going to go out. It's no longer going to be the focus of any sort of discharge.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yes, it does.
I mean, Jupiter and Saturn, within the memory of the human race, had been dwarf stars. Okay, particularly Saturn, right? Now, like I say, you've got a description of this purple age and of the Saturnian age in Troy's other book, which is called Saturn Death Cult. Okay, the website is called SaturnDeathCult.com. And Troy actually read through a number of these, at least 2 or 3 of these books of Eduardo Cardona's, right? And that's very difficult to do. I mean, these books of Eduardo's were one of those is like a 400 or 500 page science journal article.
Didn't you have some kind of an affiliation with him?
With Eduardo?
Yeah, were you a fact checker or something for him?
No.
Oh, okay.
The guy that I really was working with to any great extent was Charles Genenthal, and that gets into this other branch of the Velikovskian family. At any rate, you'd ask how I got, where I got started being interested in this sort of thing. I mean, it goes back to associations with the Thunderbolts group and the people involved in the Thunderbolts group. Mm-hmm. And they had me talk at those conferences several times about gravity. Did we talk about gravity in the last section?
Well, I've heard you talk about it, but no, we haven't. We just talked about Mars. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, gravity with your weightlifters and you, I mean, it makes perfect sense. And I never thought about it before I heard it.
Yeah, see, Albert Einstein tried to describe gravity as a 4-dimensional differential geometry sort of a thing. You cannot start with that and believe that gravity on the surface of our own planet ever could have changed terribly much within the last, say, 50 or 100,000 years. Yet it's a very easy demonstration that it has, and that a large dinosaur would simply be crushed by his own weight in our present world. Okay.
Yeah.
That is that's the situation with this square cubed problem that you heard me talk about. Weight is proportional to volume, which is a cubed figure, width times breadth times height.
Yes.
And strength is proportionally cross-section of bones and muscles, which is more like pi r squared. Okay, if you double your dimensions, if you go to sleep at night and you're 6 feet tall, you wake up in the morning, you're 12 feet tall. and everything just got expanded by a factor of 2. That factor of 2 gets cubed for volume, width, breadth, height, 2, 4, age. It could be 8 times heavier. But you're only going to be 4 times stronger. You'll have cut your weight ratio in half. And there's a limit to how many times you could ever cut your power to weight ratio in half and still be able to stand up and walk. And for the strongest human athletes that we know anything at all about, the limit is right around 20,000 pounds. For somebody like Magnuson or Bill Kazmaier, you know, somewhere right around 20,000 pounds, it would become the same level of effort just to stand up as it is to do one of those 1,000-pound squats or deadlifts at the normal weight of 350 or whatever. Okay.
Yeah, that's a game changer. I mean, that should slap somebody in the face right there.
It did, right? And it's like, you know, there was a huge controversy over that. Like 30 years ago, I was the only person on the planet saying anything like that. Nowadays, I think most people agree. You know, they've done the math. It's like they've listened to the arguments, and I think most people agree with me that you couldn't have large dinosaurs walking around in today's world. You know, the controversy now is like, do you or don't you want to believe in, you know, in an expanding Earth theory of any sort? And the answer to my way of thinking is no. You know, I have no use for Earth expanding theories, and
even with what they found out down there at that, you know, the deepest place under South America, where the ground is actually coming up and expanding.
I hadn't heard about that. Give me a second.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Geez, what was it? I just saw it not that long ago. What's that one what's the place called where it's really deep down under South America? The Mariana Trench.
I don't really know.
Okay.
There's 2 reasons why anybody would ever talk about an Earth, you know, expanding Earth theories, right? One would have to do with dinosaurs. The other would have to do with the tectonic plates of the ancient supercontinent, Pangaea.
Right. Okay.
You know, the tectonic plates of Pangaea wouldn't fit on a planet. You know, that they appear as if they would require a planet of greater curvature, a smaller planet, right? But there's another way of explaining that, right? In other words, you've got the Earth sitting there underneath the dwarf star with its pole pointed straight out the dwarf star. It's going to get pulled into an egg shape, right? You know, it's not going to be spherical the way it is now. Okay, it's like Pangaea was simply sitting there at the high point of the egg. Okay, and that would explain the greater curvature. Now, as far as dinosaurs go, like I say, you couldn't have it. It's like, you know, if you put a sauropod dinosaur next to Bill Kazmaier at equal sizes, then what you're seeing is one creature at the top of the food chain, the other pretty near the bottom, right? In other words, Kazmaier's body is 90% bone and muscle, right? And that's trained as well as you ever could have muscle trained. And the brachiosaur's body is mostly gut and digestive system for processing leaves and grass, right? And I mean, if Kazmaier couldn't make it 20,000 pounds in our present world, then a brachiosaur sure as hell couldn't.
Yeah, I heard they had 3 hearts in their neck just to pump the blood.
No, it's ridiculous. You've got 2 problems with dinosaurs and then with large dinosaurs, sauropods on their necks, right? And you've got 2 kinds of sauropod dinosaurs. You've got like brachiosaurids, which, according to the bones, apparently held their necks upwards, and then you've got the diplodocids, which, you know, would have held their necks outwards, or at least that's what the bones indicate. Okay. Either way, you've got an insurmountable problem, right? It's like in the case of the brachiosaurids, it's everything. You know, in other words, the limiting value of something like that in our present world is the giraffe, right? Now, you know, it takes a gigantic amount of blood pressure to get blood to a giraffe's brain. Okay, and the giraffe has this very, very tight skin, which acts like a pressure suit, you know, like for a fighter pilot.
Right.
And basically, I mean, a giraffe's blood pressure would blow our vascular system apart. While, you know, then he's trying to get blood to a brain which is 20 feet high. I mean, what is some sauropod going to do to try to get blood to a brain which is 60 feet high?
That is
experts claim that would put, you know, the brachiosaurids in the position of just being constantly at risk for some kind of a circulatory system disaster, right? Now that's no way to go through life, you know, especially if you're trying to rule the world for 60 million years or something like, you know.
Yeah.
Doesn't make sense. So they're claiming, well, it must be that like what the bones are telling us is wrong. They must have all just held their necks outwards, and the diplodocids apparently did hold their necks outwards. But in that case, you're dealing with a problem which is just as bad or worse. I think is worse. You're talking about torque, right? Because you've got a creature with a neck which is 60 feet long. Okay, and if the and that neck could weigh 50 or 60,000 pounds, right? And if the center of gravity of that neck is even 10 feet out from the shoulders, then you talk about a 500,000 foot-pounds of torque and on up, right? Now, what is there in our normal life which corresponds to a 500,000 foot-pounds of torque? The answer is nothing. I mean, as far as like any kind of a nut or a bolt or anything that screws together with that much torque. What you would really be talking, the one thing in the earth which would be ballpark for that kind of torque would be like the combined maximum torque of all four of the engines of an Iowa-class battleship. There would be enough torque to drive a 65,000-ton warship through the water at 35 knots.
Yeah.
Okay, and you're going to hold that with some kind of a structure made out of flesh and blood?
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
No, so there's no way for a large dinosaur to hold his neck in our present gravity, and that problem, if somebody ever really was able to do the math for it, which I have not been able to do, would almost certainly be a bigger problem than the question of gravity, just being able to support weight, on land. They used to think dinosaurs, the large ones, would have lived in water, but they had no adaptation for that. They would have needed snowshoe feet, right? In other words, the feet they actually have would just sink straight into muddy river bottoms. They would take 3 steps to be immobilized.
So what happened?
Yeah, gravity changed, right? It's like you've got like pictographs, right? Like, what's the word I want? Not pictographs, but like petroglyphs.
Okay.
Native American petroglyphs, which show, like known dinosaur types on canyon walls around the United States. And some of these used to be more common than they are. You've still got the one glyph, which is, and by the way, did I ever get as far as showing my screen here?
No, I was waiting for that. Yeah. I liked that last time. I just heard that they had found some dinosaur remains with flesh still intact, and they said it dated to 4,000 years old. And of course, it's being poo-pooed by mainstream.
What I've read is that they've done they've done blind radiocarbon testing on dinosaur remains and gotten dates between 20 and 40,000 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, nothing more than 65,000 years old is going to radiocarbon date at all. It's like beyond that point, like radiocarbon would essentially all be gone. They've been finding like soft tissue in dinosaur remains. Can you see my screen now?
Absolutely can. Yes. It's
Okay.
right there.
They've been finding soft tissue for dinosaur remains since 2006, right? This Mary Schweitzer.
Yep.
Mary Schweitzer at the University or NC State University, right? And she caught grief for that at first, right? It was like they had a tyrannosaur. They had a leg bone which they had to break in half, saw in half, to get back to, it was out in some remote place, and the only way they had in or out of that place was a helicopter, which is not one of these giant military helicopters. And they couldn't carry but about half of that, right? And so they saw this leg bone in half, and they started, investigated, and like lo and behold, right, soft tissue. Nobody had ever done it before. Everybody just assumed, that it couldn't possibly be soft tissue in dinosaur remains. But I mean, it's been turning up since then, more and more cases of and this is like collagen and hemoglobin and collagen and God knows, it's all kinds of stuff shouldn't be there, proteins. It's not going to be there after even 1 million years, much less 65 million years. Give me a second. It's like,
Okay.
You've got the screen here where I had several things to show you. I've got the picture of Jupiter and the sun sitting there, and it's like this ocean world that you see would be Ganymede 50,000 years ago. That's one of Troy's.
Very familiar with it.
Right. Right. Give me a second. If I go to search the web here, and I'll just type in Agawa rock.
Agawa rock.
Let me show you what turns up. If I go to images, right? But this picture here, can you see this?
Yeah, my eyes went immediately to that one.
Okay. A friend of mine who died like about 8 or 9 years ago was the best known of all Native American authors, right? This was Vine Deloria, who used to teach at the University of Colorado, and who has a number of books which are standard university textbooks on Indian affairs, right? Custer Died for Your Sins, right?
Yeah.
And a number of other books like that. And he's got the one book which is about catastrophism, and that book is called Red Earth, White Lies. why did he write that, right? I mean, he was attempting to refute these standard theories as to what happened to the large animals in North America 12,000 years ago. You know, they lost about 40 species of what you call megafauna,
Yeah.
including the mammoths, including mastodons, including, you had a 2,500-pound bear, you know, this California short-faced bear.
Hmm.
You had an American super lion, you know, like 5 feet tall at the shoulders, you know,
Wow. Yeah.
1,500 pounds, right? I mean, you wouldn't want to meet him.
No.
The standard theories blame the extinction of all of these creatures on the ancestors of the present-day Native Americans, right? Well, that's ridiculous. In order to exterminate a species of large animals like that off of an entire continent like the Americas, you would have to have two things. You'd have to have firepower and mobility in quantities beyond anything that Native American ancestors ever even dreamed of. Okay, the first instance there ever was, to my knowledge, of the human race ever having, you know, firepower and mobility and those kinds of quantities would have been Genghis Khan's army.
Hmm.
Okay, you never had anything like that. At any rate, so the book is largely a refutation of what they call the overkill hypothesis or the blitzkrieg overkill hypothesis. There's a little section of that book which deals with dinosaurs in Native American traditions, oral traditions, and you know, Vine said that you know, that he had been conducting a study of Native oral traditions all the way, you know, from from north to south in the Americas, all the way from Alaska down to Tierra del Fuego, right? And talking to every storyteller and every medicine man in any of these tribes. And he said if there was anything that flummoxed him, at first it was the extent to which every one of these tribes had oral traditions which spoke of Indian ancestors having to deal with dinosaurs on a fairly regular basis, right? Now the stegosaur they called Mishi Pishu, which means water panther. Okay, and that's what you're seeing here. The glyph that you see here shows this water panther, which they described as having red fur, a cat-like face, a saw blade back, and a spiked tail, which are used as a weapon. Now that's a stegosaur. And you'll notice that the creature has these legs directly underneath him. They're not splayed like any sort of a lizard or reptile. Okay, reptiles don't walk with their legs underneath their bodies. Reptiles walk with their legs out to one side.
That's the reason why they can't breathe and run at the same time, right?
Yeah. Well, they have a harder time walking on land, moving on land than we do. Now, you know, everybody in the world is going to say, well, the creature has horns, right? And the stegosaur never had horns. There's an explanation for that. You know, Indians, I mean, touch-up artists would touch these things up every 10 or 20 years or so, every couple of decades. And somewhere long ages, you know, centuries after the creature itself had died out, you know, some touch-up artist simply figured that a creature that big needed horns. You know.
Yeah.
So the horns are just an add-on, right? But the saw blade back, right? The dorsal spikes are something that you don't see. Now, Lewis and Clark said that these glyphs were common at the time that they made this expedition of theirs. And they said that their native guides were in mortal terror at the sight of these things. You know, the glyph meant, like, you know, caution, one of these things lives here, right? Now, what I believe to be the case, the stegosaur wasn't by any means one of your large dinosaurs, right? But he was big enough that the change in gravity was going to create a problem for him. So he tried to move into water to deal with all the extra weight and everything, you know, after gravity changed. But he didn't have any real adaptation for living in water. So he didn't, you know, bull sharks got him or something else in the Mississippi River got him, right? You know, so he didn't really survive in water. He didn't have any real adaptation for living in water, right? But he tried, right? That I believe is the story of the stegosaur. Again, that's called Mishi Pishu. Means water panther. The name is similar to the word Mississippi. The Mishi, apparently, the Mishi part of that means water.
Water. Okay.
Right. So we were talking about, like, you know, just a whole host of things which, you know, like led me to Ganymede, right? And we talked about one of those things the last time, right? We were talking about Mars images. And you've got this overwhelming body of knowledge now coming in from those probes that you have on Mars. And all of these images, I mean, thousands and thousands, I've been looking at those kinds of images since the early 90s. And they show, like, unmistakable evidence of previous major civilization on Mars, right? I mean, you've got like complex structures, buildings. You've got the remains of cities and urban urban infrastructure, which you saw, right? You've
Yes.
got, mechanical debris, junk and debris strewn across the sands everywhere. Some of it, easy enough to figure out what it was. Other parts nondescript, right? So that Troy McLachlan and I, somewhere around 2011, right, or the early part of 2012, we're looking at the possibility of co-authoring a book on human origins, right, which would assume an origin from Mars, would assume that modern humans came here from Mars, right?
Right.
But by the same token, Troy also had posted a number of articles about this purple dawn in the Thunderbolts, in the Thunderbolts forum, and the question, like, where do we even start with some of that stuff, right? It's like, if I go up here and just say SaturnDeathCall.com,
Yeah.
you've seen this, right? He's got a new edition of the book out. Timeless Age in a Purple, okay, the Saturn Death Cult, Part 1, Timeless Age in a Purple Haze.
Looks good. Yeah.
A picture of the Earth underneath the dwarf star, right, with one pole pointed at the dwarf star. Link to the Ganymede hypothesis, right? This video of Troy's, right, which got an awful lot of views, right? I mean, it's worth watching if you haven't watched it. And then this picture of the Earth and Mars inside the plasma heliosphere. You see, it's like a rocky body like Earth and Mars associated with a dwarf star would most often be inside the plasma heliosphere of the dwarf star. And that says that you've got radiant energy bouncing off the interior of this plasma heliosphere and coming back to the planets from all sides. You're not going to freeze, right? You've got enough radiant energy, but it's like, the whole middle part of the light spectrum is just going to be missing, right?
Yeah.
It's like the whole middle part of the light spectrum is going to be missing. And what you're going to get is a deep, they talk about red and brown dwarf stars. What you're really going to be seeing is a deep purple, right? What they call the purple dawn. And you get like indigenous peoples of the earth that speak of a purple dawn. I mean, they're oral traditions. When you didn't have a sun, when you didn't have daylight that we have now.
Yeah, it's also amazing how people are attached to the color purple, especially children.
Okay, it's like, what is it? Lord Byron said, you had, like, purple and gold were described as royal colors in ancient times. And most books will tell you the fairy tale version of that, that these were just expensive dyes, right? I mean, they were royal colors because average people couldn't afford them.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's pretty lame, right? Purple
Yeah,
with the colors of the sky in the 2 ages prior to ours. Royal colors. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, what does that tell you about creatures living? What does that tell you about creatures living in such an environment? It tells you that, they're probably, dinosaurs and the old creatures of the earth, lemurs, tarsiers, bush babies, these things all have the same kinds of huge eyes, right? And these are eyes adapted to an environment where, I mean, they just never saw anything that we would call daylight at all. I had several things up here. It comes right at it. You can see the picture here. You've got lemurs and bush babies, tarsiers, owl monkeys, owls, right? These are the old creatures of the earth, right?
Yeah.
That's what dinosaurs, okay, you had starting around, I was seeing this at the same time, articles in science journals talking about dinosaurs on the nightlife, right? Okay. And then you've got these new reconstructions of hominids, and Danny Vendramini's Neanderthal. And, this is like a body punch. This is like one of Roberto Duran's punches to the liver area or something like that, right? To these people that, you see, the Neanderthal has become a sort of a poster child for Kumbaya religion. Right. The people who, were investigating Neanderthal remains, like in the 1860s and 1880s and 90s, understood what they were seeing, right? The got Marceline Boule's image reconstruction, which is reasonable, I think, right?
Yeah, it's
And,
pretty creepy looking.
I'm sorry?
That's pretty creepy looking. Wouldn't want to run into that guy.
Not somebody you'd want to run into, I mean, you wouldn't want to be unarmed,
No,
you know.
definitely.
Danny Vendramini's images are shocking to a lot of these people, and it's almost comical, right? Because you run into what I call Neanderthal apologists, like on forums.
Yeah.
The other thing that makes this hard to deal with is that, like, evolutionism sort of cuts across all political barriers, right? It's like, you could go on like left-wing forums, like Politico or whatever, sort of, able to know or whatever, right? Or you could go on Free Republic or any sort of a conservative forum, and the stuff that you read coming from the evolutionists, there's no way to tell the one from the other. It all sounds the same, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
They don't like to see this, right? It's like they for the last 60 years, the Neanderthal has been presented as if he was just a slightly different human, right? Just a slightly different race, or maybe slightly bigger brow ridges, maybe
Yeah.
a few other Let me.
Now, what about the people saying that we have like 2.5% of Neanderthal in our blood and all that? Is that true, do you think? Or
I don't think it matters. Where do we even start with that one? It may or may not even be true, right? Troy doesn't believe that's even real. He thinks that those samples may have been contaminated, right? I don't think it really matters. It's like you've got all kinds of problems with that. Supposedly, humans of Asian or European descent have like some small number of genes which are shared with Neanderthals, of some small number of Neanderthal genes. People of African descent don't have that, but nonetheless, that's still ridiculous. That says that even if that's true, that means those genes don't do anything, right? They're just sort of genetic baggage, garbage, right? I mean, there's very little genetic variation amongst modern humans. Okay, it's like some say that within the entire human race there's less genetic variation than there is in a typical group of 40 African monkeys of the same species.
right, there's a bottleneck.
Yeah, if you've got this Svante Pabo over at the Max Planck Institute, who's supposedly the guy that's put this Neanderthal genome together, and he wants to claim that these genes, which are shared with Neanderthals, indicate crossbreeding. Okay, that doesn't.
Yeah.
And there's several reasons why that doesn't work. It's like,
I don't buy that.
oh no, there's no reason to buy it. Look, they're assuming that the Neanderthal looked just sort of like a slightly different human, right? And that's the problem. See, it's like these images of Danny Vendramini's, basically are consistent with everything we actually know about the Neanderthal hominids, right? It's like, what do we actually know about the Neanderthal? It's like, human needles are common, right? Whereas early human needles, Cro-Magnon needles are common. Nobody's ever found the first Neanderthal needle because a creature with a 6-inch long Ice Age fur coat does not require needles. Yeah. The Neanderthal's rib cage was, conical.
Yes.
As are the rib cages of the great apes, right? And this is to make room for this gigantic upper body musculature, which is the musculature that you need to haul a 200 or 400-pound body up into a tree.
Yeah.
Right? Boreal creature. Now, the Neanderthal was not a boreal, right? Nonetheless, he was a descendant of creatures which were. Our rib cages are cylindrical, right?
Yeah, that's how we can throw.
Yeah. Humans have the kinds of shoulders that you need for throwing things or using something like an atlatl. Monkeys and apes don't. The Neanderthal wouldn't have. Okay, the motion to throw something or to use an atlatl is the same motion that you use in swimming. Okay, humans are basically aquatic mammals.
Yeah, that's always intrigued me.
Well, that's another funny thing, right? It's like Elaine Morgan and the aquatic ape theory. I mean, this is the best theory of human adaptation that's ever come down the road. It's never gotten any traction in academia for two reasons, right? It's like there's no fossil evidence of it. There's no fossil remains of an aquatic ape which have ever turned up on Earth, right? And there's never been a body of water on this planet which would be safe for humans to live in on a full-time basis. Okay, You
Yeah.
only need to spend 10 minutes in the ancient sea monsters section of the Smithsonian Museum to comprehend why humans don't live in water, certainly why they didn't 50,000 years ago.
Yeah.
So this theory of Elaine Morgan's is perfectly good. It just needs a different kind of a world to happen on, right? What's going to happen? I mean, like, you've got a question of whether or not humans are descended from hominids, and then you've got a question of whether or not humans have ever interbred with hominids, right? You've got two separate questions. As far as descent goes, for any hominid to have ever evolved into a human, he would have had to lose everything he needed to live, right? He would have had to lose his fur while you had ice ages going on. He would have had to lose almost all of his night vision while trying to make it as a land prey animal, surrounded by creatures, predators, which could see perfectly well in the dark. You understand what I'm saying?
Of course. Yes.
It doesn't work, right? He's going to have to lose almost all of his sense of smell. The human sense of smell is almost worthless from the standpoint of a land prey animal, whereas an aquatic mammal doesn't really require much of a sense of smell. Okay, but if Bambi had our sense of smell, a deer would become extinct within 1 month, right? I mean, it wouldn't take very long. It would just be an effortlessly free meal for every predator that ever laid eyes on them.
Yeah. Cats, man, can really smell too. When I open my little can of food for my little cat, it doesn't matter what part of the house she's in, she smells it instantly.
Right. Now, see, the main nervous system connection for humans is from eyes to brain, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whereas the main nervous system connection for a dog is from nose to brain, right? Now, a dog, some of them have decent eyesight, right, but not all, right? And probably most dogs would miserably fail a simple maze test, which a rat could pass. Okay? Now, that same dog, later in the day, you could tell him to go track some deer that you've shot with a bow and arrow or something, and has run off into unfindability, right? And that dog will go and find the deer, ignoring the scent of other deer. Once you put him on the scent of the deer that you shot, then he will be able to track that deer down and show you where he was. And he'll be thinking to himself, like, these humans must really be retarded not to be able to do that.
Yeah.
This is after he failed the maze test, right? You understand what I'm saying?
They do have amazing noses.
Yeah. Now, the Neanderthal was viewed as a primitive human rather than as an advanced ape because of the size of his brain, right? In other words, the Neanderthal brain's a little bit bigger than ours, right? But the Neanderthal brain was dominated by the areas of the brain associated with motion and vision, and particularly vision. And that combined with the eyes, these huge dark world eyes, says that what you're really seeing is that the Neanderthal brain is like the neurological equivalent of the circuitry for a military night vision system of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? You've got a creature whose whole, his whole thing is it's basically a weapon, right? I mean, he was not able to use throwing spears, javelins, or atlatls. They were using, he was able to make spear points and bind spear points to, it was not stupid, right? I mean, it was a reasonably intelligent creature. He was able to use fire, right? He was able to bind spear points to staffs, but he was using little short thrusting spears and going out there and killing mammoths and other large animals, orcs, and, creatures you want to have to take on with just a spear in your hands.
No doubt. I wouldn't want to. I know that. It took a lot of guts.
Right.
Yeah,
So
that's a mammoth.
Okay.
So we were in a perpetual twilight, pretty much.
These are the first humans that came to Earth, right? But a human is not going to arise under those kinds of conditions. This was the big aha moment, right?
Yeah.
At some point, looking at all these pictures of the early creatures, the purple dawn creatures, I said to Troy, we're looking at this whole thing the wrong way. I said, Mars would have been in the same deep purple environment that the Earth was in 50 or 100,000 years ago. And if you can't expect humans to either evolve or to be created in conditions which are hostile to them, right? Mm-hmm. I said, you've got this double solar system. This is the other thing which had become obvious, right? You had like a divided solar system 50,000 years ago. If you look at the key to the whole thing is the spin axes of the planets, right? If you look at, what you would expect a solar system to look like, I mean, just given any kind of a normal theory as to how solar systems arise, you would expect the spin axes of the bodies in that system to be roughly perpendicular to the plane of the system, right?
Yeah, this is true.
Okay, you would expect the axis tilts to be all fairly close to zero. And in the case of Mercury and Jupiter and the Sun, you have, those bodies really do sort of look like that. I mean, all those axis tilts are less than 10 degrees, right? You've got two bodies in our system, which are Venus and Uranus, which are oddballs, which have oddball axis tilts. I mean, Venus is upside down. You could say that its axis tilt's 180 degrees, or it spins the wrong way. It spins retrograde. And then Uranus is laid over at a 90-degree angle, or close to that 85 something, right? And each one of those two bodies has its own separate little story. But the other four main bodies, Neptune, Saturn, Mars, and Earth, all have this roughly 26-degree axis tilt, between 24 and 28. And that's a big anomaly, right? I mean, if you want to believe anything resembling a standard theory of the history of our solar system, there's no way to explain that. I mean, what that really tells you is that those four bodies were captured as a group, right?
Right.
And then you ask yourself, what is it about being captured as a group which is going to produce, like four bodies having the same axis tilt? And what it really says is that these four bodies were not an orbiting system at the point at which they were captured by the sun. They were an electromagnetically aligned system, like a shish kebab or something like that, with the poles pointed upwards towards the dwarf star. And they would, in other words, what Troy and I believe happened ultimately is that the Saturn, the Neptune, Saturn, Mars, Earth system, flew into the plane of the Sun, Jupiter, Mercury system from the south at a rough 26-degree angle. And as the individual bodies peeled out and began to orbit the way they do now, just ordinary gyroscopic force caused them to keep that 26-degree approach angle in the form of axis tilts. That's why you have this rough 26 degrees. If you go back 50 or 60,000 years ago, you've got a double solar system. You've got a very bright cosmos to the north, right? You've got the Sun and Jupiter and Mercury. And the other thing that you will have under those conditions is that you would anticipate Jupiter to be up closer to the main sequence star than it is now, which is the normal situation in our galaxy. I mean, you read about hot Jupiters, right? And gas giant planets orbiting closer than Saturn and Jupiter orbit now, right? John Cook basically said that he had done the math, and he ended up believing that, that Jupiter would have been like a little bit closer to the sun than the Earth is now, well within the habitable zone of the sun. And that says that these four large moons of Jupiter's, particularly Ganymede, the largest of them, would have been getting, warmth and radiant energy both from the sun and from the dwarf star. What was, it's not like the dwarf star died out immediately, like just flicking a light switch off, after it was captured, right? I mean, this is an ongoing process. But, I mean, as we see it now, it's definitely a gas giant planet. It's not a dwarf star any longer.
Right.
That video of Troy's goes into the history of Jupiter. I mean, that's worth watching. Apparently, if you were to make the heliosphere of something like Jupiter visible, it would appear in our sky bigger than the moon, right?
Yes. I saw that. Very good.
That got a lot of attention. That video got a lot of attention from the Thunderbolts group, right? And we've got the one person in the Thunderbolts group who basically likes the Ganymede hypothesis, Don Scott, right? You've got a couple of other people in the group that don't care for it. So it's a mixed bag.
Yeah.
But you understand what I'm saying? It's like you've got, a double solar system. You've got like one very bright part, and then you've got like a very dark part, which consists of the, like I say, Saturn and Mars and Earth. And and in that dark part, the hominids were native to that dark part. Humans were not. There's no way to believe that humans would have arisen. If you can have humans arise within something like this, then the humans are going to arise in the bright part of this whole thing. That's what I told Troy. It's somewhere along about 2012. I said, we're looking at this whole thing the wrong way. It's like humans must have arisen, like on some kind of a thing, like in this bright part of this double system, like in the Sun, Jupiter, Mercury system. Maybe some kind of a planet that got blown up or doesn't exist any longer or something. Troy knew a bit more about Jupiter than I did at the time. It's like he, at that point, went into an investigation of Ganymede, what all is involved in Ganymede. And very cautiously, right? He said that, like, if at any point this had ever started to look like trying to pound a square peg into a round hole, or something didn't fit, he was going to drop it, right? But it never did. He said the more he looked at this, the more obvious it became. The parts were fitting together just of their own volition, right? So it's like chess grandmasters describe as a game that plays itself. Okay, that gives you a home world for modern humans. Well, let me tell you a little bit about Ganymede, what you would have had 50,000 years ago. It's an ice world now, but Ganymede has water, it's got oxygen, and it's got an intrinsic magnetosphere. And the intrinsic magnetosphere is the rocky bodies in our system now, it's like only the Earth and Ganymede have it.
Mm-hmm.
This is what you need to protect yourself from cosmic radiation, and particularly around a dwarf star. Dwarf stars flare occasionally. They're not as stable as the main sequence stars. Have I run that by you at all, or?
No, go ahead. Talk about it. I like talking about
this is like a creation evolution type thing. It's like you very often, you get into arguments over how old the Earth is.
Yeah.
And they used to try to put some sort of an estimate of the planet's age together from just by adding up Bible chronologies, right? I mean,
mm-hmm.
I think they used to believe the Earth was somewhere around 5,000 or 6,000 years old.
Right. They still do. Yeah.
These are Christians who want to know better, right? Because they're not doing Christianity any favors, by trying to tell anybody that the Earth is 6,000 years old. But the hell of it is that, what Trina came up with is not exactly Genesis, but it's closer to Genesis than it is to any kind of a book on evolutionary biology. Okay, I mean, you could think of it as moving Christianity into the space age, right? Mm-hmm. We've got the one body in our system which really is ballpark for some kind of a 5 or 6 or 10,000 year age estimate, which is Venus, right? Yep. And Venus looks like that. You've got a surface temperature that would melt lead, right? You've got like about 850 degrees Fahrenheit, right? That's the surface temperature. You've got a 90 bar CO2 atmosphere. That said, if you could survive on the surface, it's like a 2-mile-an-hour wind would knock you over, right? It's like you've got a massive thermal imbalance according to all the raw data, and there's a big argument over that, right? You've got like massive upwards infrared flux. You've got like a complete lack of regolith, no dirt on Venus, right? You've got cratering, which doesn't look like anything you would expect if the planet was 4 billion years old, right? Every bit of what we know about Venus says that it's a new planet, right? It's hot because it hasn't had time to cool off, right? The Earth and Mars don't look like that at all. So they've got to be a whole lot older than Venus, right? But they're not hundreds of millions of billions of years old, right? It's like Bob Bass once redid Lord Kelvin's heat equations for the Earth. He came up with an outer bound of about 200 million years, which is, that's more than you might like, right? But that's still not enough for any sort of a version of evolutionism, right?
That's why they have to use the 4 billion year story.
Yeah, and then you get this question of dinosaurs. You see, the people telling us that the Earth is 4 billion years old are the same people telling you that dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago. We know that's wrong. So what's wrong with the story? The dating schemes that you read are all making assumptions, right? And the assumptions that these schemes go out the window the first time you allow for one cosmic disaster of global scale, right? And there have been a number of cosmic disasters of global scale. So the basic reality is that all you can really do is guess. And even when you look at something like strontium rubidium dating or thorium uranium lead dating, the worst possible case says that you're assuming that any sort of heavy metals you find on the surface of the Earth have always been there, right? That they give you the age of the Earth. The answer says that given any sort of a theory as to how a planet would form up, you would expect the heavy metals to be at the center, right? Any sort of heavy metals you find on the surface or near the surface of the Earth are either going to have gotten there via impact or via some sort of transmogrification just from electrical discharges, right? In other words, these Birkeland currents that you get like arcing between planets could create heavy metals. Now, so all of those things are pretty meaningless, right? Let me tell you what I think you can do. It's like we've been getting radiocarbon dates for dinosaur remains, and those dates come in like a range of 20 to 40,000 years. You can make two simple-minded, but I think reasonable assumptions. You can assume that the geologists at least got the ratios somewhere near ballpark for reality, And you could assume that this 40,000 year figure would be an outside, sort of an outside figure for dinosaurs, right?
Mm-hmm.
For dinosaurs. If you make those two assumptions, then you can plug that 40,000 year figure into the normal little 24-hour clock model for the age of our Earth, which says that, if the whole history of the Earth is one day, 24 hours, then dinosaurs appear at 10:45 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And that gives you an age of about 700,000 years. Okay?
Yeah.
And if you multiply that by 5 or 10, just to give the evolutionites every possible shot at it, then you're still only talking about like 4, 5, or 10 million years, right? Which I could live with that. In other words, if somebody asked me, what's your best reasonable guess? The closest thing you could come to an educated guess, as to how old the Earth is, I would say 10 million years would be an outside figure, just based on what I just told you. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. A million years is a long time. They talk about it like it's just a couple weeks, though.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
I know. But, so at any rate, when you talk about a Milankovitch cycle, or you talk about cycles of things which go back over millions of years, right? Well, I mean, the millions of years aren't there, right?
I don't see it.
This is why I like Troy's and my vision of a Saturn theory better than I like some of the other versions of it that you've heard. Now, somewhere 25 or 30 or 40 years from now, I think it's absolutely certain that some version of a Saturn theory will be generally accepted. You've got 4, 5, or 6 different versions of a Saturn theory floating around, right?
Right.
It's just a question of which one gains general acceptance. But I recommend Troy's and mine. Excuse me, I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's all right. Take your time.
At any rate, what's the difference between Troy's and my version, the McLachlan Holden version of a Saturn theory and some of the other versions you might read about? The difference is that our version is basically self-contained, right? It's like our version does not require anything getting captured from cosmic distances, from interstellar distances.
From light years away.
Yeah. You see, the nearest other star to us is Alpha Centauri. It's about 4.3 light years away, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the versions of a Saturn theory that you'll read has Saturn wandering in from the Sagittarius dwarf galaxy.
Yes, I've heard that.
Let me explain the problem with that. The problem is that, suppose you had something like Saturn that wants to hit our system, starting from something even as close as Alpha Centauri, right, say 4 light years away, then there's only 2 ways it could happen. You're going to shoot something, you're going to shoot it with a rifle or a shotgun, right? Now, to hit something with a rifle, you have to aim it. You have to aim the rifle. You've got a scope or something on the rifle to aim with.
Yeah.
Okay? You don't aim a shotgun. If you ever aim a shotgun, you never hit anything with it. You point a shotgun, right? It's like, that says that like you're just going to point something at whatever it is and just pull the trigger right. And it's like, if nothing intentionally, in other words, for something like Saturn to have ever been captured by our sun, starting from 4 light years away, you would have to have somebody like Ming the Merciless from Mongo aim the damn thing, like directly at our sun.
Yeah.
It would have to be it's not going to happen just for out of the blue, right? The chances are 0. You see what I'm saying? Whereas if some huge cloud of objects the size of Saturn had ever, in other words, had ever passed around our sun and just the one got captured, that cloud of objects, Saturn-sized objects, would still be, within 1 or 2 light years of the Earth. It'd be very easy to see, right? Our telescopes can see Proxima Centauri. That Alpha Centauri consists of 2 main sequence stars, a binary, and then 1 dwarf star, which is called Proxima Centauri.
That's an excellent point. Yes, Proxima Centauri at the red dwarf.
Proxima Centauri is sitting off a little bit too far to be gravitationally bound to the binary, right? So I assume that it was, created in some sort of a Birkeland current, right? The way that an early solar system would be created, according to the theory that Troy and I espouse, says that you get like 99-point-some% of the mass of the universe in plasma form, right? You get charge separation across immense distances of space in this plasma impermanent space. And because of the charge separation, you get Birkeland currents arcing through, similarly huge regions of space. Okay, these currents look like twisted pairs of currents. They look like DNA, RNA spirals, right? And where these current pairs cross each other, you have short circuiting. You have what are called electromagnetic pinch points, or Z pinch points. And, these Z pinch points do have the power to agglomerate plasma into much more solid bodies, into stars and protostars and, dwarf stars, and possibly also into rocky planets, although it's more likely that the rocky planets invariably are created by fissioning from the gas giants or from the dwarf stars, as in the case of Venus being ejected from Jupiter or Saturn, or, as in the case of the Earth's own formation. Mm-hmm. So, this is what we believe. We believe that our whole system, including the Sun and Mercury and Jupiter and Saturn and Uranus, Neptune, Mars, Earth, all of this stuff we believe originated in a single Birkeland current somewhere back, some, few million years back, a few tens of millions of years back.
As a Herbig-Haro object.
Yeah. They're named after the two astronomers, Herbig and Haro, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can see these things. It's like, let me go up here, and if I just say Herbig-Haro.
I did a piece on them from Wall Thornhill's website.
Right.
Yeah.
Herbig-Haro object images, right?
They're amazing.
You can see these things like this one, for instance. You can see the twisted pair of currents. We've actually got like a Birkeland current like that running straight through the center of our own galaxy. What do we call that? The double helix nebula?
Yeah.
And that's probably what powers our galaxy. Spiral galaxies like the Milky Way appear to be like what they call homopolar motors, driven by these Birkeland currents. Yes. And again, the Thunderbolts group does a better job of explaining these kinds of things than I would, right? So it's like, you'd be better off to watch their videos on homopolar motors and combinations of things like that, Birkeland currents and galaxies, spiral galaxies.
Yes.
Let me tell you a little bit more about Ganymede.
Okay.
You've got two things that you're trying to explain with Ganymede. I mean, normally you've got like this ultra low moment of inertia, the fact that most of the mass is concentrated towards the center. Mm-hmm. And then you've got this intrinsic magnetosphere, and they try to explain, both on Earth and on Ganymede, they try to explain the intrinsic magnetospheres as being created by a dynamo effect. And that really, it doesn't work in either case. I mean, in the case of the Earth, if the Earth was being, if the magnetosphere was being created by a dynamo effect of some sort, it wouldn't weaken over a period of time. I mean, it would be topped off continually. Okay, but we know that our own magnetosphere is weakening,